The Beast Claws are another paired weapon category to come out of the DLC, this type being very comparable to regular claws, and that's they're a close range slashing based bleed option. Now the differences being is that they're slower, but they do more damage, which honestly, fist based weapons kind of already filled that niche, especially because they actually do much more stance damage, whereas Beast Claws get the exact same stance damage values as regular claws, and honestly they're just nowhere near as good in my opinion, because the movesets are so incredibly long, but the damage difference is not that great. The light attack combos have animations that are even longer than things like great hammers, so the total DPS is not going to be that good, and even when it comes to their charged heavy attacks, the animation is longer than like a giant crusher charged heavy attack, but it's obviously going to do way less damage and way less stance damage. And I think the most disappointing thing about the moveset is that for some reason the motion values are just lower across the board. Basically every single attack in the moveset just does like less damage than a claw. Also regular claws do get 110 crit on average, where these get only 100, and also the claws typically just have more range with their weapon types, but this weapon type actually does involve you having to lunge forward a bit more when actually attacking, so it kind of does negate the poor range that it has. Now the weapon type isn't completely useless, as it does have some positives going for it. One is its running heavy attack. It is a nice little double swipe that does come out really fast, stun locks pretty well, can actually help proc the multi-hit talismans and do some decent damage. And the moveset overall does actually involve you moving around a whole bunch and actually be really low to the ground. So there are lots of instances to where some attacks could go over your head, or with how often that you're actually moving, you could be a really hard target to hit as well. Another good part about the moveset is the feinting attack. When you go for a charged heavy and you cancel it with the dodge button, it does do this really good backflipping attack that actually lets you create a lot of distance, and you can also go with a follow-up light attack that can make you lunge right back into it. Now the damage of this feinting attack is like still less than a light attack, and the DPS is not going to be there, but one, it actually does do 8 stance damage with the feint attack, which is just as much as an uncharged heavy, and just being able to go back and forth in between an opponent can be really beneficial, especially if you are fighting humanoid enemies. I wouldn't use it all the time as it is very situational, but it still is pretty decent. And as for the only other positive that I can say about these, it's going to be their unique skill options, because at the very least they do have 2 designed Ashes of War that you can infuse onto them in both Raging Beast and Savage Claws, which are fine skill options. Neither of them are really that amazing. I do think Savage Claws is the best one, as it can actually make this weapon type do a respectable damage and actually proc bleed really quickly, especially when paired alongside Blood Flame Blade. It does have a pretty long animation, but thankfully you actually can cancel the last part of it. Now as for a Raging Beast, it is pretty fun to use, as it does serve as an iframe dodge into like a single attack that actually does get a follow-up double hit as well. Now the unfortunate part is that the damage is just not that good. It does involve you having to jump in the air, which means it's going to have a longer animation. You get no hyper armor, and the stance damage is not that good either. Like this thing definitely feels like a poor man's blind spot Ash of War, and there might be some instances to where it could be useful, but for the most part I would just use Savage Claws almost every single time. So yes, overall I would have liked for this weapon type to be a lot better. It's going to be really hard to balance because it has to compete with things like fist weapons, claws, and hand-to-hands, and honestly this is like the worst of the bunch because it gets the worst stance damage, the worst DPS, some of the slowest moves, and pretty mediocre skill options. For how long the animations are for these movesets, they should have done way more damage and also just have more range. They could have designed them to look like the Beast Claws from Bloodborne, because those actually have really respectable range. They definitely have a really cool looking moveset and they're really fun to use, but they definitely are lacking. Now, there are only 2 different Beast Claws in this category, the regular Beast Claws and the Red Bear's Claw. And both basically have the same range, the exact same movesets, both get passive bleed, but the differences being is that one cannot be infused and one can. So the one that can be infused in the regular Beast Claws are going to be much more versatile. They're not going to get as much damage as the Red Bear's Claw with a strength build, but being that you can buff them, pair it alongside Blood Flame Blade or pair it alongside different types of infusions, you can get way more bleed build up, and it's going to have better synergy with other different types of builds. But even then, I think the Red Bear's Claw is still going to be the better option, purely because of its skill. Because Red Bear's Hunt is actually incredible, and it's that good of a skill to the point where it can just completely replace the entire moveset of the Beast Claws, which, as I've mentioned earlier, I just do not like at all due to them being really slow, poor DPS, having poor stance damage, not really staggering that well either. Because yes, the skill of this weapon does have some very nice hyper armor, does do really good damage, it stun locks smaller enemies as it hits them multiple times, procs bleed really quickly, and only consumes like 8 FP per attack. So you very well can just use this skill the entire time, more so than using like the light attacks or heavy attacks, as it's just going to work way better. Like it's literally faster, easy to use, and just can do more damage. So I think overall as a weapon, it does work very nicely. I still don't really care much for the rest of the Beast Claw moveset. And the fact that you're only locked into a strength-based build means you're not going to really have much synergy with other different types of builds, especially at higher levels. But it still works really well. Now there is going to be a major downside of the skill in that it does consume a lot of stamina. So when building around this, I would recommend going into like at least 30 endurance, because if you're using the entire 3 hit combo, your entire stamina bar is going to be gone. and that's probably the main reason that stopped me putting it into the S tier. If it had like half the stamina cost and actually had a better moveset overall, I probably would put it into the S tier. And funnily enough, the existence of this skill kind of makes me wish that the moveset worked a bit like this instead. Like, just because a weapon is really small and has bad range, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to get really bad damage and actually be a faster moveset. Sometimes you can actually have like a really hard hitting weapon, have it stagger really well, but still be short range, which this thing would have kind of filled that aesthetic. So if the light attacks worked a bit like this, obviously a bit more toned down, I feel like this weapon type would have been really cool, but yes, unfortunately for the most part, they still need a bit more love. Anyway, we are now done. That is all the DLC weapon categories now ranked, and that is also every single like melee weapon category now ranked as well. But we still aren't done with the rankings just yet, as we're going to cover the seals next, and then probably move on to things like the crossbows, ballistas, and then the staffs. So if those things do interest you, definitely do subscribe and also follow me on Twitch, because I'm live there every single day. And also for the next coming week, I'm going to be doing a Souls marathon, where I'm going to replay all the older games, because it actually has been 10 years since I've actually first introduced myself into the Souls series. So just to celebrate my 10 years playing these games, we're going to be doing that. So definitely do pop by and give us a follow. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.